I was initially very disappointed with the turnout. I had actually assumed that we'd have a few thousand people waiting in the waterside. It wasn't a few thousand, it was a few hundred.
All you need for a march or a demonstration to be successful, a protest to be successful, is to have enough people to fill a television screen. That's all you need. So the fact that there's only 400 people there to begin with doesn't really matter, because there's enough people to fill up the TV screen.
I have come down here this afternoon in the company of my 3 Westminster colleagues. Mrs. Anne Kerr from Rochester, MP, Mr. Russell Kerr from Feltham, MP, and Mr. John Ryan from Uxbridge. I can say here that it was only by force of time that we only have 3. We could have 30, or in fact we could have had 300.
I'm here today to simply see what is happening with regard to the freedom of people to demonstrate. Having myself been maced in the eyes, that's why I'm wearing these glasses, and having been bashed about and pinched by the police of Chicago, I'm concerned about the people of Northern Ireland, and as I am about the people all over the world.
We organised a bus to go to Derry. There were 30 or 40 people on it, including a hitchhiker whom we picked up on the way, who was a bit surprised to find what he had arrived in the middle of.
As we were driving in, we could see these police tenders full of police and darkened out vehicles. And there was a feeling of, oh, that's not supposed to happen. What do they need all those police for?
Any person who wishes to parade or hold a meeting is quite at liberty to do so, provided he holds it other than in an area specified in the order made by the minister.
We hold it, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would certainly hope that in conducting this march in our city, that we will act in a responsible manner, demonstrating to the authorities that our intentions are to secure civil rights for the people of our cities and not to cause strife or bloodshed in our city. We are demanding homes, employment, freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. We do not wish bloodshed or violence.
The march started and didn't go on the appointed route. Time we reached the top of Duke Street, the cops were already a number of rows deep, blocking off the front of the march. And then we noticed that the police who had been behind us had come up and were at the rear of the march. So we were trapped really, sort of with 2 lines of police.
I was in the front row with Jerry Fitt and Eddie McAteer, and there were people who were in the second and the third row were quite determined that the MPs would remain in the front row. Jerry, who was beside me, Jerry was felled, but I managed to get through. And when I got to the other side, I decided that wasn't a good place to be, so I came back through. And I got 2 blows on the shoulders, but luckily enough, not on the head.
Betty Sinclair, I remember her shouting, you must go home, go home. Now I thought, well, my God, we didn't bring all these people here to tell them just to walk away again, you know.
I remember when I was standing in the chair in Duke Street, preparing to speak and hesitating, there came a shout from the crowd. which was, what about the Mexican students, McCann? And then I realised what he was talking about, that there had been sort of the student demonstrations against the dictatorship in Mexico City just a few weeks earlier during the Mexico Olympics. And the point that he was making was immediately obvious to me. Well, you know, if the Mexican students, he had scores of people, possibly hundreds of students, were massacred by the Mexican police at that time, then if they could stand up to that sort of repression, why couldn't we? And that certainly sort of was prompted me to speak in the way that I did. The person who shouted, what about the Mexican students, McCann, was Mickey Devine, who some years later, obviously, was the last of the H-block hunger strikers today.
I was a neighbour of a police sergeant who happened to be on the front row that day, and I recollect that one of the things that he said to me was, "What are you doing with this bunch of Fenians, Ivan?"
It's at this point that the Derry radicals, the Belfast radicals, and people up from Cork, they start to kind of try and get the provocation. So they start hurling placards at the police, they start shouting Sieg Heil and making loads of references to Nazis, and they keep goading them, they keep using missiles to try and get some sort of reaction out of them.
You could feel the hatred. That was my recollection of that day, that it never got started, but you could feel the hatred. And the first realisation that the police hated us.
This wasn't a crowd control operation. You know, if you really wanted to clear people away from Duke Street, you wouldn't box them in at both sides. This was a punishment operation. And everybody knew that. Everybody knew that.
Clearly, preparations had been made to deal very harshly with this march if they had brought up water cannon, which had never been used in the UK before, I think. So they seem to have made a very clear decision to stop this march in its tracks and physically batten it off the street, perhaps in the hope that this would mean there wouldn't be any more marches if that's what they thought. They were very wrong.
I was euphoric. I was delighted. I mean, people think me heartless. Some of the journalists interviewed me at the time, and I was bubbling with enthusiasm. I said, I'm very sorry that so many people were hurt. You know, very sorry. But listen, this is the most important day of my life, and I believe for working class people, the most important day. I was euphoric.
For us as young socialists and presumed radicals, it was a baptism which we did not try to avoid. To be showered by the water cannon and to go home with your shirt drenched was it was something to acclaim amongst your own peer group.
I was a student radiographer in Altnagalvin at the time. It was my last month of training, and I thought I would be of better use up in the hospital. It counted 43 people who had to have skull x-rays. Yeah. One of the first patients I had in was Jerry Fitt himself, you know, and he was about the third or fourth patient in, and I said to him, reminded him who I was, and he said to me, oh my God, he said, I didn't think when I was having tea and sandwiches at your house this morning that you would end up x-raying me.
I've got 3 stitches in my head at the moment. But I will say this, that 3 stitches will not deter me from carrying on the fight which I have undertaken on behalf of the ordinary people of this country.
They did come right up to the police lines. Now, whether that constitutes a provocation or a deliberate attempt to create a situation of disorder is open to judgment, and I would let others judge whether that was their motive or not.